Most of us assume that fracking is wreaking havoc on landscapes and communities across the United States. The presumptions you probably have about fracking is that the process is inherently dangerous. But is that true or fair? Can you even clearly state what fracking is? We hear on the media variations on the same few themes. Are fracking chemicals safe? Is fracking causing earthquakes? Is fracking contaminating water across the country? What are the myths and realities of fracking? What if an energy company wants to frack on your land? Should you? What would that process be like for you? Find out on Emir Phillips, American Pragmatist.
Ignoring all of the remedies, believing all of the rumors, with their endless database. I wanna sit with my enemies and say we should have done this sooner, while I look them in the face. Maybe that will crack the case.
Hey Emir, I'm trying to present a full view of this shale revolution in the United States. Where should we even begin with this conversation?
I guess we begin at Fracking 101. Take a big step. Overall view, a full view of shale development got to recognize three critical facts. First, the shale revolution has created benefits. Second, it's caused damage and imposed costs, societal, socioeconomic costs that can't be denied. And finally, there are a number of critical and important socioeconomic uncertainties involving the shale revolution, also known as fracking.
Let's focus on those uncertainties. With all that we don't know about fracking, why should we take the risk at all?
Well, okay, now you're alluding to the notion that until all the risks of an activity are fully understood, we should hold off and wait. You know, I'm not keen on that.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to agree with the philosophy of the caution, but it's a coherent way of looking at the world. And after all, we're talking global warming, human extinction, some of these big, environmental problems that would collapse our society. So to err on the side of caution seems super prudent.
Okay, in that context, yeah, nations like France and Germany, along with your home state, New York, have essentially adopted that approach, banning fracking, or they're in the process of imposing more extended moratoriums against fracking. But you and they're all wrong. They're all wrong. We cannot do that. We can't afford to do it.
Okay, but those European countries, like compared to the United States, their policies, they tend to embrace precautionary principles. And they're more ready for, when it comes to new technologies, they see.
Except France and Sweden now. France, I cut you off there, sorry about that. But still, because I get perturbed. France and Sweden, when it comes to nuclear, and then all of a sudden the institution of hypocrisy. They are very aggressive about nuclear, okay, France and Sweden.
What about genetically modified foods and GMOs? Overall, the European nations, they've adopted far stricter regulations than the United States. And wouldn't you agree with that?
Well, I mean, a lot of Americans would agree with that. I don't know. If you apply the precautionary principle to GMOs or to oil and gas development, should you apply it to everything? I mean, especially when the stakes are involved with energy costs.
Well, okay, give me an example of a time where in America we just threw caution to the wind when it came to something with technology, and it all turned out, ice cream and roses.
Okay, all right. What about cell phones? At the time, and some people today still fear widespread use of cell phones increases the likelihood of getting cancer. Yeah. And remember, the same in the 70s was said about the microwaves.
Yeah, I remember standing in front of my microwave and my mom telling me I was going to get cancer while I waited for my popcorn to pop. But what was the final resolution with that issue?
The National Cancer Institute at the National Institute of Health stated in 2016, this is from their website, quote, "Studies have thus far not shown a consistent link between cell phone use and cancers of the brain, nerves, and other tissues of the head and neck. More research is needed because cell phone tech and how people use cell phones have been changing rapidly," end quote. So,
yeah, I mean, I can see how that information, if the wrong person heard that or some kind of U.S. policy maker heard that, they would they would want to be super precautionary, and they'd take it to heart, possibly ban cell phones.
Look, at the very least, it provides pretty compelling reasons for the risk-averse people to avoid them. What's more, there are a number of areas where we can know that cell phones have caused serious damage, but not where expected. And this is exactly the case with fracking. Well, okay. Just think about it. Research and common sense. Common sense should tell you that the proliferation of cell phone use has increased vehicle and pedestrian accidents, because we're on our frickin' phone and we shouldn't be, and reduce the quality of life for everyone within earshot of an inconsiderate cell phone user. Happen to all of us at restaurants, I'm sure. So do we ban cell phone use, not for cancer, but because of increased pedestrian vehicular accidents or just rude people in a restaurant? I mean, come on.
You kind of sound like a dad right now. It's like there's going to be some problem. You're going to hurt yourself. But, your point is that there's benefits, there's risk, there's uncertainties, but that's really nothing new. This isn't new.
That's right. I mean, there's risk and uncertainties. We got to assess it, and I am saying the risks tend to come in unexpected areas with new tech, and you don't know what they're going to be until you do it. You got to jump in the water to find out. Policymakers and individuals balance benefits and risks every day. We got to keep doing it. Cell phones provide enormous benefits to virtually all of us in this country, and not to mention everyone, billions of people around the world. And fracking, which serves a completely different purpose in the economy than cell phones, there the economic effects have been enormous and affecting energy prices and consumers around the world to the good, and that can't get discounted.
Okay, so like in short, what you're kind of saying is that precautionary approach might be appropriate in some cases, but it can't be used to justify the trade-offs that you and I face every day.
Yeah, precisely. If the precautionary principle is the lodestar by which you navigate risks and rewards, it quickly becomes difficult to justify using a number of new technologies, not just microwaves and cell phones. We might as well start learning Mandarin right now, because you can damn well bet the Chinese communists do not have this risk-averse attitude about world domination or acquiring energy. I mean, they go all out on coal, which is horrible for the environment, and we won't even consider fracking, which is a lot more ambiguous.
Yeah, we're currently using coal, and yet this conversation about fracking seems to be even more polarized. Why is it so polarized?
Well, we're in a democratic society, and the communist Chinese are not, so our freedom of speech allows this polarization, which is ironically hurting us. Two narratives are at play here. One involving a litany of horror stories about the dangers of fracking, and a second narrative about the glories of an American energy renaissance. Well,
no matter what, the fact is that shale development and fracking is going to continue for the foreseeable future.
This is why you have to have a well-informed public debate, and it's got to be part of the policy-making process. But it needs to be well-informed. After the election in 2016, when basic facts, let alone nuanced interpretations of complex questions, were sometimes scorned, I understand this could be a Sisyphean task, but no matter what, we got to go forward and try in this regard.
Yeah, overall the polarization is driving me nuts. Like I don't even know what to believe anymore. From what I've seen when it comes to even something like fracking, the often vitriolic, misleading debates tend to render far more heat than light. Well-crafted studies that do not align with one's pre-existing views are rejected out of hand. And any shared evidence confirming the same pre-existing view, it just doesn't seem like I know who to trust. It's just they're calling it science.
The average person doesn't know what to think or who to trust. That's why we have this podcast, American Pragmatist. And the truth is there are real risks, real benefits, and real uncertainties surrounding fracking, and we got to work together to uncover and ferret those out as best we can.
I mean, that's why I'm doing this. That's why I'm doing this with you, because I do trust you, and I feel like we can get through this. So we can start right now and get a better understanding of all three. And first, I'd like to get a lay of the land. And find out where are the major shale gas and oil hotspots.
Western North Dakota, northeastern Pennsylvania, southern Texas, West Texas, a lot of Texas, Louisiana, Colorado, Wyoming, and there's more. There's more areas of fracking than you think, by a lot.
Well, roughly how many oil and gas wells have...
Okay, yeah, that might be a little better focus. All right, before the Biden administration gutted fracking through its various and numerous executive orders, in the United States, there were over 200,000 oil and gas wells, and I want to be clear, that have been drilled directionally or horizontally rather than vertically.
And the horizontal drilling is fracking?
Yes. Yeah, good. Yeah, thanks for being clear. The horizontal drilling is fracking. That's what we're talking about. So to frack basically means to drill horizontally as opposed to vertically. So these wells, particularly the horizontal ones, are the ones where the shale revolution has taken place, and most of them have been fracked.
Those places that you mentioned earlier are quite different in topography. Like, those landscapes are very different.
I know. People frequently make the mistake of assuming that every place where oil and gas are pulled out of the ground looks the same. It couldn't be further from the truth. Oil and gas production happens around some of the biggest U.S. cities like L.A., Fort Worth, where wells pop up in backyards, along freeways, and even next to fast food drive-thrus. I mean, so there's a lot of oil and gas throughout this country, and it's not systemically clear where topographically.
Yeah, I don't know if it's from the movies or what, but I always imagine that this is happening in these like rural parts of the country, like maybe western or like North Dakota or southern Wyoming, where there's cows and there's more tumbleweeds than people.
Well, okay, it does happen there. So you're not wrong in your thinking. It just needs to be broadened. Fracking also happens in fast-growing suburbs north of Denver and on the outskirts of Pittsburgh, where drilling rigs, they cast shadows over new apartment buildings, and strip malls encroach on land previously that was devoted to farming, ranching, and recently oil and gas. So we just have to think it's got to be a little more comprehensive there. That's all.
Okay, so fracking is happening all around us. It's even in cities. I did not know that. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to take a guess, but when did fracking start? I'm going to say 1950.
In a sense, that's not a bad guess. In a sense, let's back up a second. Okay, so generations of engineers and investors have sought new ways to produce more oil and gas from a single well. That's the name of the game. Many of these experiments, generally labeled, are called, quote, well stimulation. How do you stimulate more oil gas out of the well? And they involve explosives. Underground explosives have been used from day one. Fracking, which is short for hydraulic fracturing. Hydraulic fracturing is one such technique, okay? A combination of horizontal drilling, which we've alluded to before, coupled, this is the new part, coupled with exploding the shale to stimulate well stimulation, stimulate oil and gas production. That's fracking, okay? And that's what's going on.
I just want to remind you that this is a family show, so we shouldn't talk too much about horizontal.
It's funny you say that, but fracking and the other word has been, the left tends to equate those for, and then there's agenda behind that. It's a side note, but yeah, you're not far off in that.
Okay, so let me understand. Fracking is the process of injecting a fluid deep underground into rocks. It creates cracks in the rocks, in like formations of rock, right?
Yeah.
And I guess shale normally. And this helps more oil and gas flow into a well?
You caught me drinking my coffee, but yes. So, and you asked when it started. You made a very good guess. I just didn't want to give you credit at first, but it started in 1949. You were off by 1 year.
Nice.
And it was by the oil field service firm Halliburton. We all know Halliburton.
Oh, okay.
Contracted by Staniland Oil. They were the first to fracture a well hydraulically, meaning that instead of simply lowering an explosive into the earth, had it been done previously, they would pump fluids at high pressure, hoping to create small cracks in the rock and increase the flow of, in that instance, natural gas in 1949.
Okay. Well, along with reducing the risks associated with handling the nitroglycerin at the well site, hydraulic fracturing had what other advantages, if any?
The process created cracks in the rock that extended over a greater distance than earlier explosive-based well stimulation efforts. It was new. These longer cracks allowed oil and gas to flow into the well from further afield, increasing overall production and profitability. And by further afield, I mean at most a mile or two, usually a lot less than a mile or two, but at most a mile or two.
This seems like kind of like the pot industry. Like pretty soon, every Tom, Dick, and Harry is going to be fracking their own backyard.
Well, because I said overall production and profitability. Where there's profitability, the market goes. And by now, hydraulic fracturing has been applied to millions of wells around the United States and the world. And these frack jobs, as they're often called, they vary substantially from place to place, depending on the type of rock formation, which is critical. Where the oil and gas are located, different mixtures of water, chemicals, and sand are used to create these cracks in the rock, usually shale, not always, and allow oil and gas to flow more easily. That's the technological innovation, more easily.
Yeah, that attacks a major myth that fracking only deals with natural gas.
That's correct. It was natural gas in 1949, but fracking's gone way beyond that. It's oil. So correct. While the term fracking is often associated with natural gas in recent years, more oil wells have been fracked in the U.S. than natural gas wells.
Can you quickly just summarize the major difference between oil and natural gas?
They're two different products. They can be associated together, and oftentimes both will come out of the ground. But because the focus earlier was on natural gas, we tended to get more of it at first. So now, partly because the first major shale plays that fracked were used primarily to produce natural gas. That's why now it's more oil. But to be clear, the notion that fracking is relevant only for natural gas is incorrect. Sorry. And that's what I want to make clear. Incorrect. When we're talking about fracking today, we're talking about gas and oil production.
Okay, so if fracking's been around since before I was born, when my mom was a kid, why is it all of a sudden, since the 2000s, this big controversial thing?
All right, that's simple. That's a simple answer. Hydraulic fracturing, coupled with other more recent tech advances, enabled oil and gas companies to develop oil and gas from shale super profitably. Focus on that word, super profitably. And this reduced gas and oil prices for all of us globally, but especially in the United States.
So it's really about profitability.
Yeah, super profitability to be more specific. Come on, in a capitalist society, super profitability means pretty much God ordained. So it's going to happen, and it's going to happen a lot when it's super profitable.
My understanding before talking to you was that the industry in general, they've known for a long time that the rocks, the big rock formations were the keepers of vast stores of oil and gas. But these rocks, they were in most cases they were too tight to tap economically.
Yeah. Unlike conventional oil and gas formations such as limestone or sandstone, shale revolution, and other tight rocks are impermeable, too tight. That is, oil and gas does not easily flow through them because they're impermeable. Hence the need for explosives. You got to crack the shale profitably, that's the key, profitably, to get at the oil and gas.
Okay, to be clear, in a conventional reservoir, the fluids and the gas that can move easily from one part of the rock to another, like water moving through a sponge.
That's perfect. That was a great analogy, and that's dead on. Like water through a sponge, but not with shale. Not with shale.
So if shale back then was not profitable to drill, then how did it even get started?
Okay, good question. Despite the technological challenges involved in tapping these impermeable formations, shale remained attractive to some within the industry. Some.
Okay, why? No one drills to lose money.
Yeah, good point. On the chance that by doing it, not doing the precautionary principle we talked about, going against the precautionary principle, by doing it, it became even a smidge profitable due to the vast potential for much more oil and gas production from shale. If only engineers could find a way to coax it out, that's what led to continued research and experimentation. Everyone knew there was gold there. Everyone knew there was a ton of gold there, and a couple of people said, if we do it, we might get lucky. Something might happen. Let's take a chance. We just got to get at it more cost effectively.
How early in the process? Like you're talking 1949. When did that happen?
The 1960s. We're in the 1960s, and what really helped it was 3 atomic bombs.
Okay, so wow, so you're saying that the atomic bombs jump-started fracking?
Yeah, it did. It did.
Controversial.
Oh, it is. And I'd say no Americans know about this, pretty much. So it started in the 1960s. The U.S. government funded multiple research programs related to shale and tight gas production, but most strikingly was Project Gas Buggy, Project Rulison, Rulison, and Project Rio Blanco. Since these three experiments employed nuclear devices to release gas from tight rock formations in the late 1960s and early 1970s in remote areas of New Mexico and Colorado.
Wow, our own government used devices to help companies get gas out of New Mexico and Colorado?
It's as incredible as that sounds. The answer is yes. Although nuclear devices were used, conceptually, these experiments were in some ways similar to the early shooting wells in Pennsylvania. By that I mean using explosive to break rock to allow drilling to still reach oil and gas. Although, obviously, if atomic bombs are used, it's a much larger scale than dynamite.
Did the use of nuclear devices become common in the industry?
Fortunately, no. The technique of producing natural gas using nuclear detonations did not proliferate, but other federal government initiatives, tax credits, and price premiums, they continued to encourage companies to search for ways to develop unconventional sources of natural gas and oil because our country and our government knew our national security was involved during the Cold War.
How did the next most consequential change come about?
Okay, but after the atom bombs, by accident. But yet again, not doing the precautionary principle, not doing that, while fracking a Barnett well, an equipment malfunction created a fracturing fluid that was primarily water-based and therefore much slicker than the goopy gel-based fluids. Prevailing wisdom at that time held that water-based fluids wouldn't work in shale formations, as the clay embedded in the rock would absorb water and then swell to plug any fractures. But the company's engineers didn't shut down the frack job. Instead, they let it play out, in part because water was much cheaper than the chemical-heavy gels they'd been using. They thought, what the heck? And as it turned out, the slick water frack produced encouraging results. And while some in the company continued to believe it was a crazy idea, the company began using this water-based fracking fluid in all of its Barnett shale wells.
Oh wow, so that lit the fuse of the shale revolution.
Close. Subsequent tinkering with hundreds of wells led to adjusting the amount of sand in the mixture and pumping it in at greater pressure and using ever greater volumes of water.
But over time, the wells got better and better and they produced more and more gas?
Exactly, yeah. That's exactly what happened. In time, Mitchell Energy was consistently making a profit from its Barnett wells, and other companies started to catch on. So in 2001, Mitchell was bought for $3.1 billion by Devon Energy, a larger company that focused on natural gas. That's when you could say the shale revolution in America had begun.
I understand that's like an anecdote from one company, but how does the overall development of this shale development work as a whole?
Along with Mitchell's new approach to fracking, other technological advances they've been crucial in enabling widespread extraction of natural gas and oil from shale. Perhaps the most important of these advances would have to include high-resolution seismic imaging to understand better the location and types of formations below the surface, and more aggressive financial engineering, which allowed some early shale players to lease vast tracts of land prior to developing the play. All led to the perfection of directional and horizontal drilling, which we call today fracking.
Yeah, I mean, since the industry's inception, my understanding is that most oil and gas wells have been drilled straight down, vertically, aiming at an oil or gas deposit directly below the surface. But as this technology improved, some wells became drilled at an angle.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what you're referring to here as directional drilling, slant drilling or something like that?
Yeah, they'll call it. That's right. Slant drilling, colloquially it'll be called that. So this type of drilling might be necessary if an oil or gas field lay beneath a lake or a city where it would be too difficult to deploy a drilling rig and go vertical. You got to go underneath it. You got to go horizontal at an angle, slant drilling.
And I'm assuming that given how much money is involved here, we've probably improved the precision of the directional drilling dramatically since the last 20 years.
Yeah, since the shale revolution started roughly 20 years ago, you're dead on the money. I mean, so yes, to answer your question, horizontal drilling has been essential to the success of shale producers for a simple reason: permeability. You know, we can finally get through the shale.
So because of the impermeability of shale, the oil and gas won't naturally flow to the well, as it might in a conventional formation. Instead, the well basically needs to go to it.
Yeah, in this case, the mountain has to go to Muhammad. The combination of horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing, along with the other advances already discussed, I just alluded to, were key drivers that unlocked widespread shale development throughout the United States.
So this kind of revolution has literally come into the land of hundreds of thousands of Americans. Can you walk us through this process? If we were a landowner,
Yeah, sure. Okay. How it works, based on rock samples taken by geologists, we'll call this entity Gas Corp to keep it simple. They will estimate how much oil and gas was contained within the rocks on your land. So Gas Corp would hire 10 landmen. They're called landmen, professional men or women who scour land records at local courthouses to determine who owns which tracts of land. Once these landmen identify a certain number of adjoining properties, they pay a visit to those landowners to persuade them to lease their land, giving Gas Corp the right to drill on their land within 5 years. If Gas Corp does not drill within the specified number of years, usually 5, the lease expires and the landowner keeps his or her bonus.
And how much is that bonus?
Now, it can range anywhere from $100 to $30,000 per acre.
And is that a one-time thing, or are there royalties?
Yeah, there are. Normally royalties range from 12.5% to 25% of the value of the oil and gas produced from their property. And to be very clear, 12.5% is the minimum royalty rate in most, if not all states. So it's legally set in stone, at least a minimum of 12.5, could be as high as 25%. Once Gas Corp acquires enough acres to drill a few wells, it selects a site and builds a well pad.
That's actually a little bit better than I thought you were going to say. That's not bad. And how long do most of these wells produce?
Easily decades. So we're talking a lot of money here for landowners. Easily decades.
How far down does the drilling go into the ground before it starts to go horizontal?
Circumstances vary the length of the vertical section of the well, which operates day and night, but the norm is vertical drilling to about 5,000 feet before it reaches the, quote, kickoff point, where it begins to bend towards the shale layer, which would be about 6,000 feet down. Shale formations can be found at any depth, but most of the production from shale today comes from depths between 3,000 and 10,000 feet.
So by the time it gets to the 6,000 feet, the drill bit is actually moving horizontally.
That's right, yeah. And this horizontal portion of the well is known as the lateral, quote, the lateral, and it bores about a mile through the shale. Over time, companies have drilled longer and longer laterals, sometimes stretching as far as 2 miles or more. And after the well itself is drilled, steel pipe known as casing is cemented into place to carry the oil and gas to the surface. Once the drilling phase is complete and the casing is laid, the drilling rig trundles out of town toward its next job.
When does the blasting start?
Gas Corp would complete the well with a device known as a perforating gun or perf gun, which is lowered into the well. Throughout the length of the 1 mile lateral, the perf gun detonates small charges, blasting holes in the casing and the neighboring shale. These holes in the steel will soon be the conduits through which oil and gas will flow into the well.
So that's fracking?
Not quite yet. Not quite yet. Next comes the real fracking. Over the course of the previous days, dozens of trucks, or in some cases pipelines, have delivered millions of gallons of fresh or recycled water, which have been stored at the well site. Other trucks have delivered chemicals, and still other trucks have delivered many tons of sand.
Aren't those ingredients like water, sand, and other chemicals all mixed together and pumped by large diesel-powered engines into the well at extremely high pressure?
Yeah, that's and now we're fracking. That's fracking, you know. That mixture fills the well, then begins to flow out of the well and into the holes created by the perf gun. As pressure slowly increases from the heavy-duty pumps at the surface, the fracking fluid that you just described flows into the shale and creates fractures that open up the shale more, extending the small holes created by the perf gun and creating new networks of cracks throughout the rock.
I'm starting to see how this could be scary a little bit. Like all the cracks and like all these imperfections.
Okay.
How big are these cracks?
These fractures are extremely narrow, but range in length from 100 to 1,000 feet. In super rare cases, they've extended as far as 2,000 feet. These narrow pathways overcome the problem of impermeability, that they become permeable through these cracks by creating networks for oil and gas to flow from the shale into the well.
But over time, how do they keep the cracks open? And also, how do you keep the cracks from being too open?
Well, there's the fracking. That's the genius. Much of the sand pumped into the well remains in those pathways, acting as a propant, quote, propant, that's the word, tech word for it, term of art, by keeping the cracks open and allowing oil and gas to continue flowing after pressure from the fluids is reduced. Quartz sand in particular, with a high proportion of silica, is typically used because of its strength and ability to withstand the intense heat and pressure far below the surface.
Okay, so now that process has been done, that's the fracking. So what happens next?
Natural underground pressure, nature helps here, forces some of the fluids to flow up the well and back to the surface. The large volumes of water that flow back to the surface mingle with chemicals from the fracking fluid, as well as with compounds from shale, including brine, salty water, oils, and in some places naturally occurring radioactive materials called norms. It's an acronym.
I love that. I love that they figured out how to use that pressure from the earth as almost an employee. Push it up. So the gas core, they would capture the blowback or whatever you want to call it, and they would be piping it from the well and putting it in some kind of storage tank, probably located nearby, right?
Right. And in some places, flowback would be stored in open pits lined with plastic or other materials to prevent the liquids from seeping into the ground.
Okay, but that's the concern. Like, are these protections successful all the time?
Okay, now here's where fracking is going to take its first black eye. I've been pretty pro fracking, and I am, but here's the first black eye. And you've hit it. You've spotted a weakness here. Not usually is the answer. Gas Corp would then put the finishing touches on the well affixing surface equipment and building pipelines to move the oil and gas to customers. And this entire process is what is normally referred to as fracking.
Okay, but how long will these wells last, and how long will they be productive?
Well, we said earlier decades, but sometimes for 40 years or longer. I mean, a very productive shale well might produce 400,000 barrels of oil and 1.2 billion cubic feet of natural gas in its first year.
It's funny because I'm starting to have concerns, but I'm immediately going back to questions about, but how much is it worth?
That, at the end of the day, if they're coming on your land, it's all about money, right? And we kept referring to super profitability, right? Let's quantify that super profitability. Around $15 million to $45 million, depending on oil and gas, natural gas prices. Remember, shale wells can produce oil, natural gas, or both. And the world market price of those products matters on how much money you're going to make. But I mean, that's a lot of money in 1 year.
I'm assuming that the better stuff's at the top or something. Like we'll get the first couple of weeks or the initial months would be more profitable or something.
Yeah, it is. Production declines sharply over the first 6 months or so, then declines more slowly over time, producing at a slower and steadier rate for most of its life. But it's still pretty good.
Does that, we dry it up forever?
No, as with conventional oil and gas formations, you're not going to get, dry forever. You won't be able to extract 100% of the oil and gas trapped in the rock. The portion they do recover is called the recovery rate. A lot of terms of art in this podcast. Here's another, recovery rate. These recovery rates vary from formation to formation, ranging from roughly 2% to 20% in some locations. For more permeable conventional plays where oil and gas flow more easily in the well, the recovery rates are typically higher. So the more permeable, the more recovery rate, the more money you're going to make.
Okay, tell me the truth though, because I know you've read a lot about this. How disruptive is the operation of fracking on my property?
Well, from time to time, workers in large trucks come by the well site to empty the storage tanks holding water or brine.
Oh, they have to bring the water to us.
Oh, yeah. Smaller trucks also appear at your place regularly to make sure everything's working properly, with workers emerging to check valves, tanks, and other equipment. For the most part, the well sits quietly for 10 to 30 years, pumping out some combination of oil and gas, which in most cases is moved through a pipeline. In places without a dense pipeline network, oil is usually moved by truck to processing facilities.
I like this process. Keep going. So what happens next for the fracked product?
Okay, well, from there, the oil and gas will be made into the products we use every day. Oil refiners will turn crude oil into gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, and some oil will be used to make plastics. Natural gas processing facilities will separate the raw gas into its component parts, the most prevalent of which is methane, which is delivered through pipelines to homes, businesses, and power plants to provide heating, generate electricity for electric cars, and more.
I'm confused on why this is polarized, other than the environmental concerns. I'm confused why this isn't something that, you mentioned this happens in urban areas, it happens in rural areas. Like, why isn't this something that everyone's getting behind, considering the economic boom?
Well, while the oil and gas industry has developed a deep understanding of fracking over its decades of use since it created it, the concept is still being defined in the public imagination, and both pro and anti-fracking advocates have sought to define the word to suit their purposes, creating a lot of socioeconomic confusion.
Okay, so like a lot of things in this current culture, we're having a hard time with the marketing with words. The word, the term fracking, it's confusing to some people and maybe even to some experts to determine exactly what you're talking about when you're saying fracking.
Absolutely. Fact is, some of the most common fears associated with fracking are actually more likely to be caused by some other part of the process. For example, casing and cementing a well, or moving oil through pipelines, or disposing of wastewater, and so on. That's not fracking.
Okay, so to be crystal clear, fracking refers to the hydraulic fracture. That's just one of the many steps required to produce oil and gas from shale and other tight sources.
That's right.
Yeah,
Gene, that's it.
Okay. You're right. I think that's confusing. When you're saying the term fracking is often used to refer to as such a much broader set of activities, and opponents of the fossil fuel industry often refer to the fracking industry instead of the oil and gas industry. Fracking wells instead of oil and gas wells. Fracking pipelines instead of natural gas pipelines, and so on. So this is like a marketing problem.
If fracking refers to the entire set of activities related to oil and gas development, it becomes easier for advocates to argue that fracking is the cause of any high-profile cause of pollution, whether or not those cases are the result of hydraulic fracturing itself.
But do they have a point? Could there be a pipeline rupture?
Well, then you're going to blame fracking, given how you defined it, and that's not technically fracking. So in my mind, that's not fair. but that's what happens,
But they're involved with each other. Local groundwater pollution from surface spills.
Okay, blame fracking. Blame fracking. Again, if that's part of the price, that's how you define it, which I don't think is fair. And it's not the way it's defined in the industry or by engineers. Okay. And if the public believes that fracking, rather than some less spectacular issue, such as a pipeline leak or an oil spill at the surface, causes damage to human health or the environment, it becomes easier to rally political support behind a movement to ban fracking, meaning hydraulic fracturing.
It feels like they're bullying this particular industry, though, because like getting energy, there are repercussions, there's casualties, there's costs to all of the different ways.
I mean, we alluded to that at the beginning of the podcast, and the terms can't be changed according to political convenience, because that just leads to further polarization. Right. Science should drive the terminology, not partisan politics. And fracking means hydraulic fracturing, and it has been in the literature for decades.
It's like every other issue. It's a bunch of people that don't know what they're talking about, arguing and getting on their high horse. Do you have any specific examples of this happening?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, we referred to 2016 election. Okay. In 2016, a headline from DSmog, a website focused on climate and environmental issues, touted a court ruling with the headline, "Demock water contamination verdict prompts calls for federal action on fracking." This despite the fact that the water pollution in question was caused by errors in the casing and cementing of the well, a risk for any oil or gas well, whether it's conventional or fracked, whether it's vertical or horizontal. This had nothing to do with fracking per se.
To be fair, that probably works the other way around. You have examples of where it's twisted the other way.
Okay, yeah, it has. On the pro-fracking side of the story, industry advocates are typically more precise with their terminology when discussing the environmental risk of fracking. Energy in Depth, an industry-backed advocacy group, typically employs a narrow definition of fracking when discussing the risk of oil and gas development, and at times too narrow.
Give me an example.
In 2015, study examining a sample of 64 water wells in Pennsylvania found traces of fracking fluids in local groundwater, most likely as a result of spills by oil and gas companies on the surface. Energy in Depth trumpeted this finding with the headline, "New study finds fracking has not contaminated drinking water," while another industry advocacy website covered the study with a story titled, "Fracking does not contaminate drinking water." That's too strong. That's too far. The study didn't say that.
So it's fake news?
I mean, it's overreaching. Let's be polite. I mean, in today's fake news, I'm going to have to say technically, yeah. These headlines are accurate because the researchers found that spills and leaks at the surface, not the underground process of hydraulic fracturing, were the likely, you can't be so definitive, were the likely causes of water pollution. This narrow definition of fracking enables industry supporters such as Senator James Inhofe to state that my state of Oklahoma has led the way on hydraulic fracturing regulations, and just like the rest of the nation, we have yet to see an instance of groundwater contamination. An instance, he probably shouldn't have used that word.
But an audience that understands fracking to mean all the phases of oil and gas production will not understand the distinction, and thus is less likely to be concerned about the environmental risks caused by drilling and other environmental ends.
Exactly, Jamie. And complicating the matter further, when industry supporters want to tout the benefits of oil and gas production, such as lower energy prices or other economic benefits, their definition of fracking begins to balloon. For example, numerous articles from Energy in Depth, a website, employ an expansive definition of fracking when describing the economic benefits of the shale revolution, with headlines like, quote, "Leading business group says fracking provides substantial economic benefits for Colorado," close quote, and, quote, "Energy Secretary Ernest Moniz, fracking is good for the economy and the environment," close quote. I mean, and the environment, is it good for it? I mean, we're going to go that far? That's a little ludicrous.
This is highlighting a bigger problem in society, that we get to choose which truth we listen to when it comes to science. And as a result, in a lot of issues, that one website, if you're reading one website and one magazine, you end up with a completely different definition of fracking, while readers of say like energy and depth come away with a totally different definition.
At the end of the day, the word fracking comes to resemble the famous Rubens vase optical illusion. Remember, where a single black and white image looks like a vase to one person, but another sees two faces in the profile. And we're back to that, you know.
What's that test? The how do you say that guy's name? Rorschach test with the different audiences. They see different things.
Absolutely.
Or even in religion, you talk to two different Christians, and God is completely different one to the other. This confused language surrounding fracking is surely a major reason for the deep distrust in which each side of the debate holds to the other.
Oh yeah, advocates on each side hear fracking and boom, picture two completely different sets of activities depending on the goals of their argument, and both sides use whichever term best suits their agenda, ensuring continued distrust between warring factions and continued confusion in the American public on an issue that could really help our economy and give more manageable control of our energy source here.
With this issue and so many others, it feels like we need an adult in the room. We need a mediator who can stand a third party or something. I don't know if it's a political position or something, but we need some help.
The interests right now are so vested, there's not a lot of good faith discussion going on. And fracking has been, in my opinion, clearly a major boon to our economy, so the stakes are exceedingly high.
Yeah, the effects of fracking on the economy might be a whole podcast of its own.
It is, and it will be. And you heard it here on Emir Phillips, American Pragmatist.
Amir, do you feel like people, sitting around the coffee shops talking about energy, do they just kind of make up what they think fracking is? Because I feel like people don't even understand what it is, but yet they're against it.
I think people have acquired word associations. It's entered the body politic through the media, where their view of fracking is already associated with water contamination, earthquakes, filth, world destruction. It's almost become a precursor to a global apocalypse. And if you ask them to break it down, like we've done so far today, I don't think most Americans could even come close to doing what we've done today. So hopefully we're adding some value here.
I mean, I'm definitely not an expert or really even an enthusiast in this arena, but I will say it doesn't feel like we criticize the other sources of energy enough. Like we are attacking this one, and I think it's even been banned in some states, right?
Mm-hmm,
I mean,
yeah.
But to be fair, I mean, we all want to use our electronics, and the way that we get energy currently isn't necessarily like safe and clean. Is that fair?
The way we're getting our energy now, are you just including fracking, or are you going beyond?
The entire process of getting energy to the United States, including buying it from enemies, including the danger of the coal mining industry, all those things are dangerous, and yet this particular one gets attacked.
Yeah, oftentimes in this, the cost of getting our energy, the entire life cycle of the product is not included, like the transportation of bringing oil and gas from other countries or coal from China, for example. And here, obviously, fracking, the bulk of it by far is domestic and or Canada, the Keystone Pipeline, so it's nearby. And there does seem to be a strong agenda against it. And perhaps the oil and gas industry, which did a good job, I think, technologically in creating this and making much more profitable oil and gas we couldn't get to prior, I think they haven't done necessarily as good a job, and maybe they're not used to it, in marketing the positives of it. And I do think, to criticize them for a second, when they have made mistakes and errors, they should have been more forthright and brought people in, brought the cameras in, and just said, here, yeah, we screwed up, we're going to fix it. I think that would have gone a long way with the American public.
I think the American public needs to value energy independence. I think they need to consider the fact that maybe no one says it like this, but we've sent our children to die for oil. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you want to say that the wars in the Middle East are specifically about oil. That may be a little bit
it's not that far off. I mean, I'll be frank. I'm sick and tired of killing Muslims for oil and gas. I mean, right. Would we be in the Middle East if they didn't have any oil and gas? I don't think so.
You're willing to send your children to die for oil, but you're not willing to drill in your backyard. Like, I don't understand that.
Yeah, there is a little bit of, one could argue, certainly from a Muslim perspective in the Middle East, a hypocrisy that you're willing to come all the way across the world to kill 1 million Arabs for oil and gas, but you won't take the possibility of some likelihood of a little bit of contaminated water maybe, or using too much water. That seems like you're willing to shed Muslim blood and not have a little dirty American water.
I mean, somebody that's willing to ban fracking, but yet be in wars over in the Middle East, that might be white privilege.
I mean, you don't want to get too political, but from a Middle Eastern perspective, it would be highly problematic.
I'm on their side. I have to be honest with you. I wish we would stay the heck out of there. I wish we would become energy efficient, energy dependent. I actually don't think this makes a whole lot of sense to be buying.
I think we'd still be there to some extent because we have to control the flow, or be able to control the flow of oil and gas that's leaving, for example, Iran. So we'd still be in the Persian Gulf because we're not going to let them ruin. Right. Oh yeah. No. I think in foreign policy too, a president that is fracking has a lot more foreign policy options, and you have the options to leave, for example, Iraq, if you're more energy independent. And I think American presidents since the 60s have not had foreign policy independence because we've been energy dependent. And the more energy independent we are, the more foreign policy independence we would have, and that would play out to our advantage in the long run.
I'm not an intellectual and I'm not a scholar. I'm an average Joe, and I feel sometimes confused because on one hand I hear that the president's not responsible for gas prices, and I think fair enough. Okay, so don't blame them or praise them too much when things are going bad or good. But in this case, I kept hearing my liberal friends say, like, don't blame this on Joe. President doesn't control gas prices, but then he said he was working on it, and then we've lowered it a little bit. We're going to do it more. And so, what's true?
Well, I mean, it's an incredible coincidence that he did sign multiple executive orders, essentially curtailing or drastically curtailing fracking in the United States, and gas prices went up accordingly. And then when Trump obviously increased fracking, prices went down. I mean, I don't think it takes a genius to figure out if you domestically produce oil and gas at home, you don't have to pay the transportation cost. There's no foreign policy implications. And as you raise the supply of oil and gas, prices certainly are going to come down. So this is economics 101.
I remember him saying something like there was going to be a tax-free day or a tax-free gas price or something like that. Like, so obviously that implies that there's a gas tax. So what percentage of my gas price is actually taxed?
It depends on the state, but taxes on your gas are quite high. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if you add up all the various taxes in a gallon of gas, it reaches 50%. Not all that's going to be federal.
I was going to ask, is that federal combined with state and county or whatever?
Yeah, county, city.
Do you happen to know, like, what percentage of that? Say it's $4 a gallon. Like, what percentage does the actual gas station earn?
I don't know what their profits are. It would be interesting.
It's probably way lower than we think. It's probably a driver to get you to go into the shop and buy a Coke or something. I do know that. I remember I had one of the guys at Klein, owned a gas station, and he did say that the bulk of their profits came from, the gas obviously was almost a necessity, so it brought customers in. It doesn't mean the gas company's not making money off the gas, but the gas station owner's not, just banking away. But we blame them, or like we drive by them. Or like,
yes.
I want to talk a little bit about the marketing and the phrasing and using the term fracking. I mean, as a marketing person, I don't like that word. It doesn't feel like a word. It doesn't feel like a pro fracking word. It feels like they should work on that a little bit. What are your thoughts on fracking as a term?
It's a little too late now. fracking and effing have been associated, and I think the left has had a little bit was behind that. And the industry doesn't really care for that. In the oil and gas industry, it's a tech term. It came about organically over the last 30 years, and now it's been contextualized, politicized, and polarized. I don't know how you can willfully change words without bringing more attention to it than you want in the first place. So I don't know. I think the oil and gas industry's just got to suck it up.
With a lot of controversial phrases like Obamacare versus the Affordable Care Act, you had two different groups that calling it two different things. There was almost like a war of phrasing there. Like, is there another term for fracking that sort of like the pro-fracking people like to use instead? Or they just said, you know what, hey, that's what it's called.
Yeah. I mean, they do get real ticky-tacky on the spelling of it, the exact spelling of fracking, which I think misses the whole point. And I think creating a new term of art, unless they do a really good job, I don't think the word fracking should be their focus. I think oil and gas should focus on educating people at the level of the news, and especially at the college kid level, at the universities. They really need to focus on, offering workshops or seminars and saying exactly what they do, because they have a lot to be proud of here, the oil and gas industry, and their technological innovations for the last 30 years, bringing it together, the ability to make it super profitable, to get what was once not profitable at all. And to be clear, oil and gas usage is methane is about 30 to 50% less carbon emission than coal. So while oil and gas and methane is not equal to like wind and solar, it is a whole level cleaner than coal. And we're not abolishing or putting moratoriums on coal, but we are on fracking. So I find that to be analytically, in terms of carbon emissions, highly irregular and hypocritical.
I don't know when exactly a listener would be listening to this particular podcast, but the news seems to be changing like by the month. Like, it's like back and forth. Like today I read that Germany is considering lifting the ban, and even New York State's considering lifting the ban. Like, have you heard about that?
Well, the new Green Deal kind of went out the window when gas was getting to be $5 a gallon, which tells you how serious we are about it. The world may end, but at $5 a gallon, no way. Let's get back to it.
That affected my career too. Like when we were doing this big environmental push for like going green with cotton and all the fabrics, and all the Americans were going to be buying these environmentally friendly T-shirts, but when they found out they were $4 more, like we couldn't sell one.
Yeah. The bottom line is the bottom line, money. And throughout the podcast so far, you've heard me refer to profitability, super profitability. I mean that matters. And the fact that Germany's reconsidering, other energy sources, it publicly is denounced or renounced, given the Russian-Ukraine war. At the end of the day, when you're dependent on, this is the problem being dependent on solar and wind. Solar for Germany, it's a cold country, man. The winter's long and hard. You're not going to get a lot of solar there.
Please, tell me if you feel like this is fair. So I'm pleading to my liberal, left-minded thinkers out there, and I'm asking this question: like, considering that fracking isn't worse for the environment than some of the other processes, and it's also you can drill in different parts of the country, in urban areas and rural areas. Isn't this an opportunity for farmers that are struggling, for rural areas where they're struggling financially? Isn't this a game changer? If you care about human rights and you care about the poor, shouldn't this be something you're pushing for?
Absolutely. I mean, fracking has helped so many rural communities in America economically to come back from the dead. Now, it has raised prices inordinately in local areas, that got kind of weird. There have been winners and losers in rural.
Explain that. Why have the prices raised?
All right, I'm on a fixed income in a small town in South Dakota, right? It starts fracking. What do you think rent apartment prices are going to do? They're going to double, triple.
Progress.
Yeah, but I'm on a fixed income. I'm an old man. I'm 70 years old. I'm just saying they're winners and losers. Not everybody wins. Apartment prices just quadrupled. I got to move.
But as a humanitarian, we're trying to make opportunities for the lowest of the low. And if you give opportunities to the low, then all those things are going to happen. That's just progress.
Fair point, but what you call progress, there are winners and losers, there are victims, and for example, that city or town should probably accommodate the elderly whose rents have just tripled and say, we're going to have to maybe build a housing project outside of town to accommodate you or something, because we have tons of tax dollars now. So
what about counties? Is there county land or something where the money could be used, in municipal ways?
No argument. Look, tax revenue increases radically in the South Dakota rural town we're making up. Those tax revenues should be used to help the victims of the benefits that come from fracking.
What if that's an area created some kind of a healthcare plan based off of the money they get? Or Alaska, Alaskans make?
Yeah. You get rebates and you get healthcare advantages. No, that's true. I'm just saying make sure that happens. I'm just saying it's not an unqualified good. I'm not negating your point. I'm qualifying it. Overall, fracking has been a massive win for rural areas in America, big time. And I'm just saying it's not all good, and the government can kind of, help people who lose there a little better with increased tax dollars from fracking in the area.
This is another example. I mean, we probably say this on every podcast, but it's another example of you just can't do anything good in the world without the consequences.
I thought that's why it was important we talk about at the beginning of the podcast the precautionary principle. There's this sentiment in the environmentalists that we can't do anything to the environment where it causes one leaf to fall to the ground prematurely. And I mean, I'm being a bit of an extremist there, but it certainly feels that way sometimes. And while fracking is clearly not a pure good on the environment and the water issues are real, the benefits socioeconomically in terms of lower costs and lower carbon emissions, significantly lower carbon emissions than coal, and the fact that it's a domestic, no transportation cost, foreign policy implications given the president abilities to leave the Middle East if he or she so chooses, cannot be discounted, and it oftentimes is by the environmentalists, and I have an ongoing concern about that.
Yeah, I mean, I care about the environment too, but I do think that there's a balance there that I don't know a whole lot about, but I think people should be open to, especially when we were alluding to earlier, having these different definitions of what fracking even is. I think if there was some clarity, which I think you provided, if there's more of that kind of clarity, maybe more people would be open to it.
That was the whole point when you and I first started talking about this at First Watch, having breakfast in Bentonville. You're the one that wanted to do a podcast on fracking. You pushed me, pressured me, coerced me to do it. But you wanted to say, Emir, tell me about fracking and make me open to it. And hopefully that's been accomplished.
That's one of the things I like about you. We were at First Watch in Bentonville waiting in line, and there was an older gentleman, and you just walked right up to him. And I don't remember why, but you asked some question, and it turns out he's in the oil industry.
Yeah,
that was amazing. And do you remember what the question was? Why did we start talking to him?
Gosh, I don't remember. He was visiting his sister, though, remember? Yeah. And he loves coming to Northwest Arkansas. And he was all, when we started talking about fracking, he's the one who came to us because he overheard us talking about fracking. That's what it was. Right. He actually approached us. He goes, I don't mean to eavesdrop on your conversation, but I was. And then we started talking about fracking, and we're talking about developing this podcast. And he got so excited that somebody was going to tell the truth about fracking.
The way that I interpreted that, I think my takeaway from that was he was a left-leaning individual, but he was so pro-fracking, and I found that to be kind of curious.
Well, I asked him, I said, what's his party affiliation? He says he generally votes Democrat, straight up. But he's an engineer, and he was tired of hearing the misinformation on fracking, and he gave us his card, and he goes, please, if you need my help, we actually didn't in this case, but if you need help clarifying anything on fracking, I will help you. I mean, he went out of his way to make himself open to us so fracking would be accurately portrayed in this podcast.
I think we need more people like him on every issue, because what I'm afraid of is, let's say take someone like Donald Trump, for example, and I know we try not to talk about him too much, but you either like him or you don't like him, and if you don't like him, you're almost drawn to it almost feels like you have to dislike everything that he believes in and everything that all of his policies and everything that he cares about. You're supposed to hate, or vice versa. If you're Let's Go Brandon type of a guy, or an anti-Obama type of a person, you've sort of been kind of tricked into thinking you're supposed to hate every one of their policies. It would be better for you, for your own happiness, to learn about the issue outside of politics.
Look, the whole theme of the show is American Pragmatist. One of the unique philosophical contributions to world culture of an American philosophy is pragmatism. Yeah. And what is the essence of pragmatism is the consequences of the action and not the intention behind it. America is a culture from day one, and why we have a unique philosophy called American Pragmatism from Pierce in the Northeast in the late 1800s is, what is the functionality of what you're saying? What's the effect of what you're saying? How is that going to affect me? What's the result? It's a very pragmatic point of view. And so whether it's Donald Trump or UFO or Lucifer or whoever, if they hand you a glass of water and it quenches your thirst, there's a certain value in it. Maybe you shouldn't take the water or not, but at the end of the day, from a national point of view, if fracking is a massive boon to this country and gives us foreign policy options, to not consider it or to unilaterally disregard that because of the source of that president you don't agree with is the very definition of being blind, overly partisan, ideological. It's the very essence of going against an American philosophy, American pragmatism.
Yeah, I think that's what I get out of this show, and I hope other people do, is we try to strongman the opposition. A lot of times I'm the opposition, just generally. But
you're oppositionally defined. That's how I would define you. You're oppositionally defined to me when we have breakfast every time.
Well, but with every one of these topics, there are sincere pros and cons to you're using pragmatism, but you're outlining the pros and cons, and not just sort of like saying something like nuclear power or fracking is perfect, but there are problems. Let's talk about them.
And there's real suffering too by not doing fracking. Energy prices go up. Energy prices are not just at the gas pump because the cost of food goes up because you've got to transport the food with gas. And so you're affecting the lower end of American society by your decision. So it sounds really nice that, say, for example, someone on the left cares about the environment. Well, your concern for the environment, to be clear, is having a contradictory effect than what you probably intend on the poor, lower middle class, since gas affects literally everything. And also, to be clear, gas is in everything. Right. Because it's in plastic. Yeah. And plastic is pervasive throughout society. So this anti-gas and oil mentality, carte blanche, right off the cuff, ideologically, is nonsensical, to be polite.
Yeah, when you look at a rich person driving to work and a poor person driving to work, the percentage of that poor person's income that is used to fill that tank is a much larger percentage of their income than it is.
Well, for the rich person, it's almost zero because they're driving an $80,000 electric car for which they got an $8,000 tax credit. So the government is bending over backwards for the rich to buy their electric cars. Meanwhile, the poor, I guess, is supposed to use public transportation. If there isn't any, you walk. So,
but if we're going to say we care about the poor, we need to get real.
You need to consider that in your environmental policies, or you need to be honest about it. If you're going to put moratoriums on fracking, what's your solution? You can say, well, renewables, wind and solar, were you going to make the sun in the winter come out? Are you going to control the wind? Are you the god Apollo? Are you the god Thor? Because if you're not Apollo or Thor, you have no control. You're putting our national energy grid in the hands of wind and sun. And unless you're the god Apollo and the god Thor, we're no longer in control. Right. So our foreign policy is no longer in control as well. This to me seems obvious. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's my position.
Well, it seems like fracking, there's a solution for storing the energy, where some of the other sources of energy we've talked about, renewable sources like wind, like they were struggling with storing the industry.
Yeah, the batteries are not strong enough to store adequate amounts of energy. That's been a problem, and the batteries are highly toxic. One thing on the left with the environmentalists is they focus on carbon pollution. Well, folks, let me be real clear. There are a lot more types of different pollution than carbon pollution or carbon emission pollution. There's water pollution, and also the batteries, the lithium batteries are highly, highly toxic. The waste from the use of those batteries in wind and electric cars got to be put underground, and they're highly toxic, and that's never discussed, or rarely.
I just challenge everyone to look at apples to apples and look at the entire process from start to finish of a battery or any of these kinds of energies, and see for yourself. Like, do your own research and see for yourself if fracking is really that bad, if nuclear is really that bad, and if batteries are the answer for the future.
Mm-hmm. Sounds fair. All right, Jamie. Well, you heard it here on Emir Phillips, American Pragmatist. Thank you for listening in, and please go to our website, AmericanPragma.com, and please hit like if you like the show and subscribe. Thank you so much. Good day. Too often, the public debate on fracking is dominated by platitudes and polarization. Today, I sought to enrich the quality of the energy dialogue and policy by providing an independent and nonpartisan platform for timely analysis and recommendations to address today's most pressing energy challenges. Fracking is just a component of the shale revolution. And so, how did this revolution happen in the U.S. right under our noses with so few noticing until fracking was all around us? Just 10 years ago, most experts had expected the country's decades-long decline in oil and gas production to continue indefinitely, and with it, an ever-deepening reliance on energy imported from other countries, especially the Middle East. But as usual, things turned out quite unexpectedly. To its credit, the U.S. oil and gas industry has, over the past decade or so, combined in a suite of technological breakthroughs with additional incremental improvements that have pushed production to levels beyond what even the most optimistic forecaster would have dreamed. These innovations brought the oil and gas industry to new heights, took it to new corners of the United States, and sparked controversies no one had anticipated. Making smart energy policy choices requires approaching energy as a complex and multifaceted system in which decision makers must balance economic, security, and environmental priorities. Currently, there is no silver bullet or pure evil when it comes to our future sustainable energy. Fracking is less damaging than coal when it comes to carbon emissions, and for the near future, absolutely is a must for an energy policy that takes realistic economics into account nationally. You heard it here on Emir Phillips, American Pragmatist. This has been Emir Phillips, American Pragmatist. If you like the show, please hit like or subscribe. Also, it would be awesome if you went to the website, AmericanPragma.com. Any support there is greatly appreciated. Thank you so much.